And now, it's Boomer Life, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CIL 650.
Well, hello and welcome to Boomer Life here on CIL 650. Sterling Fox with you and joined in studio by Dr. Paul Zickler from YesWellness.com. Hello, Dr. Paul.
Hi, Sterling. How are you doing?
I am very well, thank you, sir. We've got a lot of talk about wellness on the program today, and this is appropriate for the guy from Yes Wellness. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. Remind our listeners you're 40-plus years into your medical career, which began here in Vancouver.
It did. I interned at the Royal Clement Hospital, and my first rotation was the emergency department, and that's where I ended up being for the next 18 years or so.
But back in those days, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
Back in those days, you can go to school now. You can go to med school, and you can graduate and become an emergency room physician. Back in the day when you were an intern at RCH, they didn't have such a thing as an emergency room physician. In fact, you were one of the first ones in Canada. You and a few colleagues pioneered what has become, well, part of the profession now.
Yes, we were a handful of docs that went into the emergency department, which was basically run by the general practitioner.
Sure.
And as the public got more and more reliant on terms of being seen acutely for injuries and sicknesses, it became more of a thing to do. Back then, I mean, you basically saw your GP, and it was very easy to get in. Everybody had a GP.
Sure.
It was a logical thing to do, and then if he felt seeing you in the office, he'd send you to the hospital and admit you and take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
We were in that transition. We were in that transition where things were getting busier in their offices. They were not being able to see people acutely often.
And the population was growing
and the
exponentially.
population was growing, and they're doing more bad things to each other. And so, there's a group of people, and probably, several hospitals across Canada that were some of the younger GPs said, listen, we need people here all night long. I mean, if somebody comes in the middle of the night with a heart attack or
a gunshot
asthma
wound
or a gunshot or
sure.
stab wound, we can't wait for somebody to get in their car, wake up and come in their car.
True.
So that's what happened. So we started being there full time, and during that 20 years I was in the emergency department, the group of people here in Vancouver as well as in Toronto, Montreal, they started becoming very involved in developing a curriculum for development of the residency program.
The likes of which they now have at medical school.
Exactly. So now you can go to medical school, go into a residency and become an emergency physician. It's a specialty onto its own. And now, I mean, with the new technology and in all facets of medicine, so you can imagine being facile and up to date in every major system in its acute form is a real specialty. You know, how to look after someone in that first critical hour of any system, and to be able to do it with the latest of technology.
Yeah. Now, you lasted, it's a very, to say the very least, here's the understatement of the week, the task of being an emergency room physician is a fairly high-stress occupation. True?
It is.
So you lasted 18 years. That's an astonishing record for someone. I don't imagine many ER docs do last that long.
They don't, but several of my colleagues have lasted a lot longer. In fact, they just recently retired in the last few years.
Interesting.
So, it is. It is. And you know what? I think when I look back at my career, I think what got to me wasn't the actual medicine and the stress of the emergency department per se. It was the stress, the medical conditions, the stress of overcrowding, the stress of not being able to move patients in an efficient manner, the stress of having lineups of ambulances waiting to get into the emergency department, the stress of making a decision of this person goes home and this one has to stay.
Sure.
And, making the right decision. Or coming to grips with a family saying, I know you think he's really sick, but I've got 10 others that are sicker, and
Right.
so you got to take them home. And those are the kind of things that really I think got to me. And I've told you the story before about the patient that really finally made the critical step for me. The 17-year-old motor vehicle accident, multiple injuries, and she became paraplegic in the accident. And she came in around 11 o'clock at night, and I spent the whole evening looking after her and trying to get her into a critical care bed somewhere in the Lower Mainland.
Wow.
Not at our hospital; it was impossible.
You were full, but anywhere would do.
Anywhere was good, and I wasn't able to get her moved until the next morning at about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. And that's with basically on hands and knees begging, a resident downtown to take this patient on. I came home to my wife and I said that, this is
That's it.
I can't take that stress. I can take the stress of looking after her
And doing the medicine.
and doing that, but I mean to try to get her a place and battle and argue and beg, and that was it.
So then you and a few colleagues, after you resigned after 18 years at Royal Columbian, you and a few colleagues decided to, essentially because you were an intimate group of emergency room trained people, so why don't we open a series of clinics around Metro Vancouver that would in some way replicate emergency room activities and maybe even take a little pressure off the real emergency rooms?
Well, that was our hope. So yeah, there's a group of us that all of a sudden realized that we all sort of had the same thoughts. And after I had sort of said I'm leaving, and I'm looking at some sort of clinic, several of my colleagues also had the same idea, and we all grouped together and opened our first clinic in Langley. And yeah, our idea was really to make it a sort of a step down emergency department where we could do casting, fix cast, do lacerations. We had a slit lamp to look at acute eye injuries. We designed it sort of for the quick visit as necessary. Rooms where people could lie down if there was an anaphylactic reaction that we could manage.
Right.
We really aimed for that and referred everybody back to their family doctor. And that was our intent. And it really worked well, and because we were all on the same page in terms of our experience.
But then you got popular.
Well, it got to be like the emergency department,
Exactly.
and then the follow-up couldn't be done in the timely fashion that was recommended. So, what the heck? I'm not going to wait for a couple hours waiting in the waiting room for my family doctor. I'll just go to these guys.
Sure.
They'll take my sutures out or take my cast off.
Now, the experiment that you and your colleagues began back in those days is now, of course, replicated all over British Columbia, all across Canada. We call them wellness centers and those sorts of walk-in clinics. That was the original concept, though, wasn't it?
Well, not actually, Sterling. The concept of sort of the step-down emergency department is being done now in the new designed emergency departments where they have the acute care and then they have a sort of a walking wounded section.
Right. Surrey Memorial being a good example of that.
But what happened in the sort of development of the clinic that we started was we had more and more family practice issues, and more people used us as their family doctor. When we finally sort of left the clinics, they're really family medicine orientated clinics, which we had our regular patients. We still had walking and walk-ins as well. But now that sort of leads to the concept now where there is longitudinal care, but there's space in their schedules for walkings.
Sure.
So that hopefully we'll be able to take care of the walk-in wounded where they don't have to go to the emergency department.
Now, this also morphed in its own way along the progress of it all into an experiment of sorts, another experiment
Right.
with prescriptions on the internet.
That's right.
And this is where you and the in the internet first really intersected in a meaningful way, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't really have much idea of how the internet worked at all. But our clinic, a couple of our clinics are close to the border, and many of our patients were Americans, which I really did pay much attention to. But living across the border, very quick jaunt for a family to come north. They use us as a family clinic, because we were cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, one of my partners had a patient come in that came for her prescription, and it was for tamoxifen, a breast cancer medication, and she went to have it filled. And then an hour later or so came back to the clinic, and she was weeping. And the receptionist put her back in an exam room, and my partner went back to see her and said, "What is the problem?" And she said, "Listen, I've been just able to afford to take a quarter of my pill. I'm on a fixed income.
Right.
I can only afford to take a quarter of the pill. Here I got my 3-month prescription. I can afford to take the whole pill, plus I have $300 extra every month, every 3 months."
Just for buying her drugs in Canada.
In Canada.
Wow.
And we thought, oh, that's fantastic, but never put two and two together until we were contacted by the Seattle Times.
Sure.
This patient had gone to Seattle Times. A investigative journalist picked up, did some research, and realized that there's this huge arbitrage between American meds and Canadian meds at that time. Plus, as you can recall, Sterling, our dollar was worth $1.65.
That's right. We were discount city, weren't we?
Absolutely. So not only was she saving 70-80% on her medications, but she got an extra 65 points on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So she was seeing huge savings.
Sure.
And so Seattle Times came and bought a busload of Americans, and that just exploded. We were on TV, national TV in the States, national TV in Canada. We finally had to make a decision as to what we're going to do, because our waiting room was getting filled with Americans coming to be assessed and given prescriptions for their ailments. We decided that, if the tables were turned, if I had a patient that needed meds and they had to go to Blaine to get them and save 70% that they couldn't afford here,
Mm-hmm.
I'd want somebody to help them out if that was necessary.
Well, of course, yeah.
So we did. We opened the first American clinic for Americans only, and soon we're just, really busy. But 9/11 happened. Nobody could cross the border.
Right.
And
all of a sudden, talk about a complete game changer, huh?
That's for sure.
So then, did you go into the prescriptions by mail through the internet as a result of 9/11 and the border stickiness that continues to this day?
That's exactly right. So we noticed at that time, and it was brought to attention by our patients, that, listen, people are sending them through the mail by these websites, and they were in Winnipeg.
That's right.
The first two.
They were the pioneers in Canada.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we decided, well, we made some initial inquiries, and everybody said, Canada Post, U.S. Post said, no, it's illegal to send drugs in the mail. So we made an appointment with the FDA
Mm-hmm.
in Bellevue, and they just said, listen, here are the list of stipulations which exist the same now.
Right.
If you use a personal prescription for personal use, there's no narcotics. It's a 3-month supply. We're going to allow those packages to go through the mail.
There you go.
And they have done so since 2002.
Just as a curiosity question, now in 2015 with YesWellness.com and the multiplicity of products that you have on that website, do you still have considerable numbers of Americans buying the products?
Oh, we do. We do. Especially the RX, the pharmaceuticals continues to this day, because the savings, although is not as great, are always there, and the increase in cost of the pharmaceuticals is just exorbitant in
Sure.
the U.S. compared to Canada, where we have some regulation to our prices. So there's always huge savings. But we've moved now with Yes Wellness into supplements, nutraceuticals, and wellness. We're trying to sell wellness and convince people that it's important to be well. We've gone full circle from disease and symptom management to let's try to get people from having to go to the doctor.
And we're going to really lean on wellness and some solid tips and some really good advice, practical advice. That's the word I was thinking of, for people of all ages, especially for that particular age group that says, we're too old to bother with that stuff. Right. Rubbish, says our guest, Dr. Paul Zickler from YesWellness.com. This is Boomer Life here on CIL 650 with lots more left in the program. We'll be right back after this.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CIL 650.